Welcome to the Brand Intelligence Podcast, the show where we pull back the curtain on some of the world's smartest brands. William Tyree will speak with Alex Lamascus today about the new automation mindset, a thought leadership program that recently won a Brandie Award for Best Brand Campaign from a SaaS company. Alex is the Thought Leadership Director at Workato. Alex, welcome to Brand Intelligence.
Thanks so much, William. I'm super excited to be here and can't wait to dive into all things brand and thought leadership.
And before we do that, we like to ask guests to give us a theme song. So if you were walking out on stage today to give a keynote address, what song would that be and why?
Yeah, I think I'd probably pick a specific band and then anything within that category would work for me. There's this band you may have seen a few years ago go viral on YouTube called Too Many Zoos. They're this group that uses traditional jazz instruments like a baritone sax and trumpet and drums to play what you'd consider maybe like dance or electronic beats. And I think that's pretty fun, right? It's that blend of like traditional instruments, new modern creativity. And ultimately it just captures a unique vibe that I really like. So if I had to pick something, it'd probably be something from them. They've got a new cover out of a Weezer song that's pretty good. You should go check it out.
Really? I'm a huge Weezer fan, so I'm going to have to. What's the song?
Hash pipe.
Oh my God. Okay. I totally have to check that. That's awesome. One, I love that you picked a band that is heavy on baritone sax because there's not too many of those around these days. And also, I think it's a great pick for you because when I think about some of the work you do, including this brand campaign, truly multi-channel, it's unusual. You're not doing everything that other people are doing. I feel like other people are playing two-dimensional checkers and you're bringing like many more dimensions to the board. So I think it's a really great pick. I love it. And as a Weezer fan, I can promise you that song will be on after my board meeting tonight.
Excellent. That's
And
really good.
yeah,
You can find it on YouTube.
yeah, good stuff. All right, listen, why don't you tell us first about Workato? Obviously, they're a big brand. I think a lot of people know them, but for those who don't, what does Workato do and who does Workato help?
Yeah. So we call Workato an enterprise orchestration platform. That means that we connect all of the people, applications, data, and AI together in an organization to orchestrate processes. So it's really for anyone, right? That can apply to any department, any part of the company. We'd like to say it brings that enterprise grade power that IT needs, but it has the speed and simplicity that business users like myself or like you or anybody outside of IT can also make use of it. Um, Now, for this show's audience, maybe that's more made up of marketers and people with an interest in brand. Um, a good example would be Snowflake, Hillary Carpio, who leads ABM over there. She calls it her data activation platform. So like the whole engine that powered the ABM program behind her book, Busting Silos, is basically Snowflake capturing all the data in the data warehouse, but then Workato activating that data and making use of it and all the other technology tools that are in the marketing stack. Yeah, that's basically Workato in a nutshell. And it's a really exciting place to work, right? We're in an environment that in the 90s we might have called middleware, right? It might have been like old and boring. But in today's world where companies are drowning with SaaS applications everywhere, we are stitching it all together and making it all make sense. And I think that's incredibly fun.
That is incredibly fun. Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think the mission of the company is really never been more relevant, right? I think to maybe hit on something that from a person, Scott Brinker, that I think we'll talk about in a minute. I love something that he came out with last year, which he said, yeah, there's consolidation happening, but more and more it's data aggregation, right? And it's about aggregating all that data and driving value to the whole business. And I think Workato is a really good example of making that happen. I love it. And I love the description for marketers because we all use so many tools to get things done. I think more and more I am running into marketers that are saying, hey, I was able to actually consolidate these 7 things into this one thing, but that doesn't solve our data problem. right? Data is still all over the place. And I love the fact that Workato actually activates all that data and makes it usable. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's like there's all kinds of data that we really want access to in marketing, right? Like it's not just whatever we hope lives in the CRM. Often we find ourselves reaching for like product usage data or reaching for intent data that is somewhere else. And so I think having that ability to reach into any part of the organization to deliver marketing in the moments that matter, deliver content, deliver whatever it is a really powerful ability that most marketers would really like to have.
You won a Brandie Award for a thought leadership program and a brand campaign you called the new automation mindset. The program has received a lot of other accolades as well, which we'll get into. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the campaign and how it came together, can you describe for me what is a new automation mindset? Do I have one? Let's talk about exactly what that means to you and what it's starting to mean to others.
Yeah. So the term new automation mindset comes to the forefront because in most companies, automation as a term is equated with efficiency, right? Saving some time, basically a CFO perspective on technology, which is like we use it to save some time, to automate some tasks and get them out of our way, and ultimately save on costs. And
Yeah.
the new automation mindset argues that those aren't incorrect beliefs, but they're limiting beliefs that companies can, when they expand their point of view on what's possible with technology generally, they can accomplish way, way more. And we argue that it's needed when this current business environment is way more unpredictable than it used to be. There's all kinds of stuff going on, right? We've just gone through a pandemic. We've seen the business market fluctuate dramatically, especially in software technology. And so we need to have companies that are built in such a way that where they can thrive in that kind of environment and gain strength from it rather than either be resilient just to try and survive it or even worse, break and struggle, be fragile. And so in the book, the new automation mindset, that's like the epicenter of this whole program. It argues that in order to become anti-fragile, which is the kind of company that can thrive in challenges, we need to have multiple mindsets in the company. We need to have a growth mindset, which means we embrace change. We need to have a scale mindset, which means we include everybody. We don't just say ask everybody or ask just the IT department to do our automations for us, but we allow business users and IT users to automate. And then we bring a process mindset, which is a synonym for systems thinking, basically saying instead of just looking at tasks, you should look at end-to-end processes. And in doing all those things, you can achieve this idea of the anti-fragile. Ultimately, we use the term orchestration in the book to describe it. It's not just about automating, not just about saving time or cost efficiency. It's about orchestrating your business in such a way where you're perfectly ready to maximize challenges rather than survive them or struggle through them.
That's really cool. Yeah, that is a really compelling outcome. And I love the way it's framed. I think it's simplified to the extent where it's hard to argue with. It's almost impossible to argue with, I think, for most companies. But it's also simplified enough that it feels digestible, right? And like people can understand it. One of the things that really impressed me about this campaign is how multi-channel it is and pretty out of the box, I would say, compared to what most people in SaaS are doing, which I love. It seems to me like it's a book, a podcast, in-person influence strategy, and probably a lot more rolled into one. But why don't we start with the book, if you don't mind? Because that's just an interesting cornerstone for this campaign. You've obviously got your heavy hitters from Workato. You've also got Chief Martech, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, Scott Brinker, which is amazing. And I think you've said creating the book took a couple years. So it's a really long time in SaaS, which feels like you put a really big bet on the table, which is admirable. So like how did you sell the vision for that as a starting point?
Yeah, I think the genesis of this project was we built a thought leadership program that was based around the traditional stuff you'd see other companies use for thought leadership. It's a series of posts with topics that resonated with what we wanted to communicate to the world. And I'm blessed to work at a company that has a really strong point of view and a really differentiated point of view on the market. Not everybody can say that. So that
Mhm.
was the starting point. But as we were looking at this slide deck proposing a program that was just posts and normal exec comms and that kind of stuff, we realized, hey, this if we put these together, we could just form a book. Like all these topics could each be a chapter. Why not? Let's give it a shot. And so the reason it took 2 years is because we wrote two books. We put all of
Oh,
those things together and we realized that was not what we wanted to communicate, right? Like, we realized this is very important. We should start over and write a book that like actually captures our entire philosophy as an organization.
let me pause you for that. That's really interesting. Look, as I have a few books out there and I have some sense of authorship, anyway, I won't say a lot more about that, but can you describe to me what was that moment like where you had that a moment where you're like, okay, maybe we didn't write the book that we ultimately wanted to. Just what was like that like from a psychological and emotional standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, certainly the decision wasn't all in my hands, right? Like there's a
Yeah,
lot of stakeholders involved.
of course.
VJ Teller, our CEO, is the primary author of the book, and so has ultimate decision making authority on that. And yeah, when we got to that place, I think the emotional burden is certainly there, right? The concern is are not necessarily did we mess up anywhere? Like the process we go through at Workato are often very iterative. So it's not that abnormal to take something that we've made a lot of progress on and actually decide we're going to start over. We're going to throw this out and just begin from scratch.
Yeah.
So like that, I didn't feel like I struggled with. I think the real risk was that like maybe we'll discover that we should not write this book yet. Maybe it's not the
Mhm.
right time. So I think that was the emotional burden that I was carrying through the
Yeah,
process was like, are we really going to do this? Are we really going to get this across the finish line? And
yeah.
thankfully we did, well, ultimately in the end.
That's amazing, and I love the fact that you spoke about the iterative process. I think so many people who've chosen marketing or marketing adjacent roles are probably familiar with that. I think it's something obviously that we borrowed from the world of developers, and I think it's such a healthy way to think about it because I think almost every marketer out there has been through that thing where whether it's a trade show booth or a massive ad campaign or sometimes even like a rebrand or something like that, you've all got to that point where you think, wait a minute, maybe it doesn't make sense to proceed. And maybe it's better to actually go back a couple loops in the cycle and rethink our approach and pivot it. And it sounds like I love the way that you described that even the idea for the book came together was stitching together all these different ideas, but then you got to this other point where you're thinking, "Hey, we can actually do a better job at this." What was it like then after you decided to do the reapproach and move forward?
It actually got a lot easier because we had a process leading up to our big customer conference in 2022 where we did VJ's keynote and put an enormous amount of time into that. Like we really beat the concepts up and put it was hundreds of hours to try and get that keynote across the finish line. And in doing so, we'd really crystallized a lot of these ideas. So if you go back and watch that keynote, it's an hour long. It captures basically everything we say in the book. And so that gave us that like mental framework to then evaluate everything we had been thinking about over the year before that and ultimately package them together in such a way that read flowed much better, aligned with our ultimate philosophy and vision much better. And so that process helped quite a bit. Something else we had done as well along the way was embark on a study of what we call category books. So a lot of companies will publish a book at some point or another to try and define or crystallize their category or create a new category, what have you. And so I bought every one of them I could find and I consumed them and some of them were good and some of them were terrible. And of the good ones, then we reached out to and talked with and tried to get as much insight as we could from the companies and leaders who had taken that strategy and had some success with it. So, for example, we spent a fair amount of time with Nick Meadow over at Gainsight, published quite a few books on customer success, and really defined that market using those books. Another one that was really successful was a book called Subscribed by a teen over at Zora. And so we talked to quite a few folks over at Zora about their strategy and process. And that really helped us understand what we were doing and not only how to package the ideas, but then how to launch them and deliver them once the book was ready to publish.
That's really great. I love that you did that. That's amazing. We're like in speaking with a bunch of those people, not any one of those people in particular. Is there anything that sticks out that you learned not to do? Or was like, hey, this is something we were thinking about doing, and we can learn from where somebody else has been.
I think that was the process that helped me realize that just packaging together a bunch of blog posts that you've written over a while and calling it a book is not the way to go. And it wasn't
Yeah.
any of the people that we spoke to that convinced us. It was actually some of the other books that we had read. And you could just tell, you can tell, okay, this chapter is clearly written as a post that was published on some website or some media publication at some point. You just called it a chapter. And it just doesn't work. You can see how ineffective those strategies are when those companies launched their books. They just flamed out very quickly. The program came and went. Um, and you can also just experience it as you're reading. There's this series of disconnected ideas that don't flow very well or don't drive towards some larger point of view or convince you of anything. I hope that answers your question. I think that's the idea that, you know, looking at what you want to accomplish, the time you have, the resources you have available, and if you're able to build something from the ground up, purpose built, it's actually the
Yeah.
smarter strategy. It's harder work, no doubt. Like it's way more work, but it's well worth it.
So yeah, I after you were able to get this created and something that you felt good about and that the company wanted to stand behind and promote, what did you learn about book marketing that surprised you?
I think having spent 10 years in marketing, a lot of that focus on content, I think the bias we have for digital is very
Mhm.
flawed. We just watching how a physical print book affects people and how people interact with it in the real world and
Yeah.
seeing the impact it has really opened my eyes to completely new ways of thinking about marketing, thinking about
Mhm.
content in particular. I think so much of our marketing strategy assumes that we're only ever working with digital content, right? Ebooks and infographics and stuff that people download and we hope that they read. And I think those are important things. We should certainly continue to do them. We shouldn't print everything out and ship everything out in print format. That's not the solution. But what it does tell us is that mixing that, including print content in our mix, is actually
Yeah.
a really worthwhile and a really valuable exercise. And so there's been a lot of things we've been doing even in the last few months to try and figure out how do we marry the speed that we get and the ability to deliver content digitally with this concept of a really high impact, high value print asset like a book. And we've been building some amazing things. It's been a really very exciting process, I think. And uh, it's going back to that idea of the band I mentioned, right? We're taking traditional, old school techniques and then trying to marry them with like more modern delivery approaches and technologies. And I think what we're getting is actually way more powerful than if we just stuck in the modern world that we're all so used to operating in.
Let's just highlight a little bit. You mentioned how long you've been in marketing and multimedia, frankly. Like you were a journalist with Rob Report. You were a producer of sales enablement with Andy Paul, which is like one of the ways that we met and we got to spend some time together with that podcast and that whole effort. The new automation mindset is a great podcast, by the way. If people haven't listened to it, I think it's really amazing. And I would encourage at first blush, it doesn't necessarily look like it would necessarily be for a marketing audience, but I think because of those things that you've talked about before in terms of like understanding like how to think systematically and along with the growth mindset, I think it's really something that people should be listening to. I think I'd love to hear about the role of the podcast and how you set about determining pairing those two things, as well as you also mentioned the impact of a physical book. If you could touch on how those things all kind of work together, it'd be amazing.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. I think that is a very underrated marketing strategy, and I feel like I really learned the right way to think about this when we were working together and working on the Andy Paul show. Like, I think that that really helped develop my thinking on this, which is that a podcast is what you call cornerstone or foundational content that you can then draw from to develop other content and accomplish other goals within your organization. So often, and the bias that we have to fight against as marketers is that a podcast is a metrics game, right? That we care about our vanity metrics on our show. We want to get as many subscribers and as many downloads as possible. And those things are good, right? Like those are indicators that we have produced something that people want to listen to. But that's not the end goal ever. The end goal is building, in my opinion, something that's evergreen, where we've
Yeah.
captured insights from an expert in the subject matter that we're talking about, and we can then use that for other um, forms of content. Often we'll use the term like recyclable in content marketing. So it's not only it's evergreen, but it's something that's useful in other forms, right? Something that's said in a podcast can be used in an ebook, can be used in a print book, can be used in a contributed article on a media publication. And I think that is just what makes podcasts are like a very fertile, rich ground for that kind of strategy. But another piece of it is what you touched on, which is that it interacts with other or can and should interact with other channels that you're working with. And so for us, we have this sub brand that's our thought leadership program, the new automation mindset. And so not only having a print book, not only is having a print book a powerful content asset, but then having dozens of high profile business leaders showing up on a podcast with the exact same brand, talking about how the philosophies that are captured in that book are important in their business is just a very powerful mix. So not only does the book lay out the philosophies, but then the podcast delivers just how that those philosophies are really being applied by very credible people around the world. And so that's what drove us to embark on that as a strategy. I'm always very bullish on podcasts overall as a content marketing strategy. And it goes back to what I talked about earlier, right? It's about
Uh,
building something
yeah.
that is referenceable. And my term for it is that it's reference grade. If somebody is willing to listen to an episode twice, then we've nailed it because you've provided
Um,
enough value and enough insight that it's become a reference material for their career or for whatever they're working on, whatever you're trying to sell. So that's really the vision that we have and the goals that we're setting up as far as trying to achieve something with that mix of print and digital and a podcast and a book.
yeah, that's really amazing. How do you feel like that having that sub brand, the new automation mindset, differentiates you from other people in your space?
Do you mean as far as me personally or me as the us as the organization?
Yeah, the organization. And I'm thinking about everybody who's on the front line as an extension of that organization, reps in the field, for example, and things like that. Or maybe that's a better question. Your frontline sellers, then, do they feel like having this sub brand and its assets are a way to differentiate? How does that work?
Okay, yes, yeah. So that absolutely is it's a powerful tool for credibility. I've heard sellers tell me that they feel the temperature in the room changes when they walk in with a stack of books in like a physical sales meeting.
Nice.
And I could see it. I've been to some of our marketing events and handed books to people uh, at conferences, and you could just see how it is an immediate warming effect, right? People will immediately smile and say thank you, and suddenly be much more open to a conversation than if you just showed up cold and stuck your hand out and tried to shake their hand and be like, "Hi, I'm here to sell you something."
Yeah.
So it certainly does help, and I think that's really the ultimate goal in a lot of ways of a thought leadership program. It's a blend of value and credibility. You're trying to offer something that is valuable and useful for them, for your target audience in their career, in their organization, and what their companies are trying to achieve. But it's also helping you build credibility and authority that sets you apart from your competitors. And in our space, that's incredibly important. We sit at this intersection between a whole bunch of different categories. Most often, Workato gets lumped into a category called iPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service. There's a lot of very old companies that have been around for decades selling the same software or selling the same infrastructure for years. And there's a lot of, I guess you could say, like religion that's been built up where people have built their careers on those organizations and those technologies over the years. But then there's also a lot of upstarts that are producing basically like consumer grade or entrepreneur grade tools that are attempting to break into like larger organizations. And so what that does is create an enormous amount of noise. Everybody's saying the same thing. Everybody is talking about the same messages and the same outcomes and all that. And it was really important for Workato to have a mechanism to say, this is how we're different. We've had a philosophy that has informed our product since its inception, and we've captured it here in this book. And if you read this book and if you understand these principles and believe them, if you think this way, then ultimately your choice will be very clear.
That's the that all that really resonates. And I think people underestimate how difficult it is sometimes to be in SaaS marketing in particular, because you do get into spaces often where there's a couple of people who articulate value messages really well. And then people start saying the same things, and it gets really hard for people to differentiate and for buyers to choose vendors after that. But I like to think about software in it goes in windows, right? I feel like there's windows of time where companies seem like they're truly differentiated and often are really truly differentiated from a functionality standpoint. And then everybody figures out how to catch up. And then hopefully there's another innovation and then there's another window. But it's not a straight line like that. It's cyclical. But I think that thought leadership like this, and especially with a book as a cornerstone of movement, can be really powerful. I remember a couple times historically, me personally feeling that. I remember going to Dreamforce, one of those Dreamforces, and actually being handed a copy of Mark Benioff's Behind the Cloud book. And the concepts he was talking in there, I was already familiar with, but what was really interesting then is I felt like within a couple years of that, like all the competitors were basically like saying the same concepts that he had written in the book. But that was okay because it gave Salesforce such a clear advantage. And even buyers saw through that too. When they saw other CRM players aping some of the language and the messaging there, they knew that it was Salesforce messaging, really. Marketo had a similar thing. I've done that play as well. Worked for an object face recognition company as CMO. We Privacy was a really big deal, and we took it really seriously where we did. So we wrote that, and I've seen that firsthand when you walk in with books in a sales meeting, and people are like, "Oh gosh, this is the thing we were going to ask you about, actually." And having that physical program, I think, is really important. So I love that differentiation. I completely see it. In terms of outcomes, first of all, I think just in terms of images, sometimes so much is wrapped up in an image. There's an image of the new automation mindset that looks like it's on a banner in Times Square. That looks really cool. There's an image of you and the team at the NASDAQ, which is really amazing. It must have been an amazing feeling. Beyond that, like how do you measure outcomes for this program?
Yeah, I think you mentioned NASDAQ. It's funny, those moments which look like on the surface look like great triumph are actually the beginning, right? We were just trying to kick off this program. We went to
Right.
New York City and hosted. My mental model for it was we're going to try and do a movie premiere, but for a book. So it was about a month before the book came out. We got the publisher to give us a bunch of preview copies of the book, and then we brought all these VIPs to NASDAQ and held like a really special event. John Fork from CNBC was moderator of a panel. It was super cool. And looking back on it now, I have like amazing memories of that. It was an incredible experience. in the moment, it was fairly high stress because it was like, is this book now this book is coming out in the world? How are people going to react to it? That was our first experience seeing people interacting with any manifestation of the book at all that was outside of like our bubble. So it was really interesting. But as far as your question, measuring the success of this, I'll answer it very similarly to how I did about podcasts, right? There's vanity metrics that we can look at. The book sold a lot of copies. It made bestseller lists, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, things like that. That looks like success on its surface, but it's not really what we're focused on as an organization. What we're more interested in is how many of our customers have copies of this book, how many of our open opportunities have copies, or are we getting podcast messages to the right people? And then we can measure just how effective that's being by looking at a few different things. So I've got a dashboard that helps me see deal acceleration. So I look at how much faster do opportunities close that have interacted with the new automation mindset than those that have not. We've got it's about a month, 30 days faster to close on average, which is nice. We also look at win rates, so we compare people. It's very simple: people with books to people without books, and on open opportunities or closed opportunities, and see is our win rate any different. In our case, it's about double. And similarly, ASP, average sales price, or average sales price is almost double as well. And it's not to say that this is some silver bullet, right? I'm not saying that, oh, anytime someone gets a book, they
Sure.
immediately buy twice as much as they were before. It's probably a mixture of like correlation and causation. But what that really tells us is what we want to know with the thought leadership program. Are people who are more inclined to interact with these messages, who are more inclined to think like we think, are they consuming more of our product? And the answer is yes. And so that tells us that this is, worthwhile to engage in, continue to push forward. One of the ways that we're doing that is, going back to that idea of orchestration. We're looking for the moments that matter and trying to help our sales reps deliver these books in those moments that matter. So, for example, we have an automation that's running that sees anytime an opportunity advances, anybody associated with that opportunity doesn't have a copy of the new automation mindset, the opportunity owner will get a message in Slack that says, hey, congrats, your opportunity advanced. And here are the folks on that opportunity that don't have books. But then what's really important, I think, is within that Slack message are a few buttons that allow them to deliver a book with one click, right? It's just send a book to an address on file, send a book to an updated address if you have one, send them an email asking for their address. And I think that mixture of delivering content at the speed of digital, right? We're delivering it with one click, but it's our highest impact content is really like how we like to think about this. I see that yellow book on the shelf behind you, the one from Matthew Sweezy, Context Marketing. And I like to think
Yeah.
that's actually what we're doing, right? We are, rather than doing content marketing where we're just, pushing something out into the world, looking at our metrics and say, looking how many downloads we've gotten. Great. This is a huge success. I'm looking to get into those moments that matter between our customer facing roles and the people like our customers and our prospects, and deliver the content through our sales team and through our customer success teams. And I think it's really exciting. Like it's very cool to like, start to think this way, because when you look at the overall metrics that matter, your win rate, your average sales price, things like that, then that makes very clear which moments in your buying process and your selling process matter to you from a content perspective.
There's so much to unpack there, really amazing. But I think one of the takeaways that I have is I think what you're describing, and part of it is what a lot of marketing leaders are hoping to achieve in their organizations. Obviously, like account-based marketing is a really old term at this point, all bound, orchestrated, ABM, whatever you want to call it. But I think the point is that it's never one thing. Just like in 1944, it was maybe like the ninth time that person drove by the billboard on the same highway. And then suddenly they actually saw like maybe an ad in a newspaper, right? When they were waiting for a bus or something like that. And then maybe right after that, somebody came along and they actually saw them carrying the product. So it's never one thing. It's a really big piece of influence. And so I think it's really great that you're measuring it realistically that way. And because that's really what it is. It's about. It's about delivering, like you said, I think the moments that matter. And then also just sometimes even delivering in the moments that don't matter, frankly, because I think it's accumulated experience. So it sounds like you're going about it in a really simple way because you're right. Nothing's a silver bullet, but it's ultimately just about on a simple level, like how people feel too about your brand, in addition to the value that Workato itself offers. I think that's amazing. And I think this is a good lesson. And every time I think sometimes it can be difficult to be a marketing leader. You get the whole team bought into an all bound strategy of some sort like this. And then still somehow the focus like shifts back to how many new leads did we get?
Mhm.
That is so important, but it's really about converting that business, right? Demand capture, demand creation, and then demand conversion. And it seems pretty clear that this is one of those things that can help people in those like latter two buckets really well, which is amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's exactly right. Like what I'm describing doesn't replace other forms of marketing in any way. Like it's
yeah,
not only in my opinion, what we've built is the most impactful thing I've ever been able to do in my career so far. Like it's the most power, I guess you can say, that like to reach into those moments that matter that I feel like I've ever had as a marketer. But it doesn't mean that the other marketing channels are less important to me. Like we're still doing marketing automation campaigns to try and drum up value from our email channels, and we're still doing more broad stroke programs to like help, whether they be ads or account based or what have you, to help drive this program forward. But I think you're
yeah,
exactly right. Like it's that all bound point of view where it's the mix of everything that ultimately helps to drive buying decision forward that we care about. But in my opinion, we should always be striving to get closer and closer to the moments that matter. That's always been my dream, right? To be able to say, it's not just hope that someone consumes something we produce or sees an ad and hope that it gets brought up in the sales conversation, but to bring those things together completely. It's the ultimately the mix that matters, but having that kind of North Star, like what matters, what's the most efficient way for me to like influence the buying process, I think is super important.
yeah, absolutely. Alex, any plans to put out an audiobook version on vinyl?
That's a great question. No, I don't think so. I've attempted to marry
Okay.
my hobbies with my marketing campaigns in the past, and it hasn't gone very well. But yes, I am a big vinyl nerd, but I don't know that it's 36 hours or something like that, so it'd probably be like this huge
Yeah,
box set. I
I
don't think anyone would want it.
I was just thinking about that. How many discs would that be? It would might take up like a whole bookshelf.
Yeah, it'd probably be like 40 discs or something.
All right. So moving on, we like to ask all of our guests to give us a brand myth. What's a common myth about brand strategy that you think everybody needs to know?
Yeah, so I think seeing content and brand as separate islands is a really common myth that comes up really often. And often content marketing gets called like basically equated with SEO or something like that. But really content is applies to like any form of marketing, right? And in my opinion, content is the substance. And content and brand then become like very closely aligned. You've got the obvious ways that content and brand connect in terms of voice and tone and making sure everything's consistent across the board. But when you think about your point of view or your philosophy as an extension of your brand, then you can start to unlock these different ideas that we play with our thought leadership program, right? It's not just, hey, cool, let's make sure that everybody's sounding the same, everybody's using the same words or whatever. Those things are very important, but those are basically table stakes. But rather than viewing content as this island where people think about SEO, people think about ebooks, and that's it, bringing your philosophy and point of view, your content marketing and your brand marketing all together in one is, I think, a much smarter strategy. And it's something that we have really leveraged. It's not just been a marketing strategy, it's really been an organizational strategy, a business strategy, because Workato was founded based on this strong point of view about what should happen in organizations. Our brand message, our brand guidelines, they're all shaped around that philosophy, but then our content comes in very closely and draws from that as well. Like we speak at that thought leadership level very often. So I think that like that, in my opinion, that myth is that these things are islands or these things are separate parts of an organization is just like not helpful. And ultimately we can be much better off if we view them holistically.
Yeah, I think that's a real great one. I think when a lot of people think about brand, they think about the visual identity first and foremost, right? And that's absolutely a big part of it. Second, a lot of the times they think about, okay, the products and the value that you articulate from that comes out of product marketing is also part of that. Fair, totally fair. But I think that when you talk about the point of view, I think that you're completely right. It has to be a fully integrated strategy. And if you're creating content and your writer, they aren't cascading down from some sort of a larger point of view, that really is the essence of your brand and maybe even your brand values that you articulate with your employees. I'm often like, what are you doing? Where did this come from? Because ultimately, I think hopefully the company has an identity and a point of view about that is very connected to the buyers and your customers and the specific challenges that they're trying to solve that you're helping them with. I think it's a really great call out. And I think it's also not easy. I understand sometimes why people prefer to think of as content, even some marketers as this other island, because it's not always the easy path is to think about everything cascading down from this really strong point of view. But I think when you do that, history has proven that's the most effective way to really run your business.
Yeah, I think that the idea that your point of view should be baked into these things sounds cliche, but I highlight it because a lot of companies don't actually have a unique point of view, right? And so then this idea of content or brand is just okay, cool. We should be a little different than our competitors. We should be somewhat memorable, and we should write content that was interesting to people, or it helps move deal cycles forward. But if everything's rooted in a really strong point of view on what should be different in your market, that really causes you to act a little bit differently, and it forces those two functions to come together, right? It doesn't that at that point, then those decisions aren't just being made on these arbitrary things, but it's being made on like a vision for what the future of business should look like, and they absolutely should fit together in one holistic way because that's the better way to do it. It really does lead to better results.
Totally right. Like, what challenges have you run into and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think the starting point for a consistent brand is a consistent brand leader.
Yep.
We've got someone named Simi who does an amazing job with that at Workato, who really sets the bar for what defines the Workato brand, what its like sub brands look like. We've got several of them, whether it be the new automation mindset, or we've got like a webinar series called Coffee with Massimo, who's one of the co-authors of the book. And those will each kind of have their own unique characteristics and style, but ultimately they tie back to the qualities and the characteristics that define the parent brand. But keeping things consistent and aligned can certainly be a challenge, especially for what we've been doing, where we've got to orchestrate this program. We've got multiple stakeholders, right? There's our own internal design team and folks who are doing a lot of the work. Like if you look at the cover of the book, that was our team that did that. Shout out to Natalie and Kathy who helped us out there. But then there's also things outside of that, like we've got like agencies and contractors who come in and help with certain parts of it, certain parts of the podcast we've done with the studio, and having like clear definitions of what the brand guidelines are, something that our brand team has done very well. But then helping build like a brand portal that other people can like easily consume and access to when they're helping us out, like third parties are helping us out is super important. And then having a series of checks or reviews with the people that matter before something goes live. Of course, that should be like a pretty obvious step. So I hope that's answering your question. I think that what we've done in that case has probably been fairly generic, but there's no doubt it's incredibly important. And I think it's helped build the presence of this program overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, brand portal says a lot. It's interesting. I think that when you're running something like this, you got two choices. Not to be too simplistic about it, but you could be the brand police and play whack-a-mole across all the issues that are going to rise, or you can really be in charge of it and be a brand manager, right? And I think that having the guidelines, the approved assets, all the latest versions automatically there in one place for all your partners, your agency folks, your internal folks is really key. Because without that, man, I just can't imagine going back to a world where everything is handled in Slack and email. That's just too hard. So that's awesome. I totally agree. And brand compliance is just really easy. Think about all the work that went into creating what's essentially, as you refer to it, a sub brand of Workato, and having that be consistent. It's all got to be tied together really consistently. Amazing. Cool. Listen, thank you so much for being on the show. This is going to be super inspirational, I think, for a lot of people. Anything else you'd like to talk about or plug before we close?
I think if there's any folks on the call from a marketing background that have an interest in learning about like how to think like this in your organization, we do have a couple episodes of the new automation mindset would be of interest. The one I'd recommend the most would be Hillary Carpio. She's senior director of ABM over at Snowflake. In my opinion, the way she thinks about technology and marketing is the new automation mindset. Like she perhaps embodies it in the most of many people we've talked to, because she looks at all the technology available to her and says, none of that is going to deliver what we need, right? What we need is up here. And what all these off the shelf tools can get us is down here. And so my job is to get us from here to there, right? Set this vision of what's possible and to go there. It really has inspired me in a lot of ways to think much differently about how we look at marketing, how we look at technology and data in marketing. So that's an episode I recommend. And we've also talked to Jim, who's the CMO over at Uptempo. It's another good episode to check out. But yeah, and feel free to check out the book. You can find it on Amazon or Kindle or Audible or wherever you consume books.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, William. Good seeing you.
Please help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. To listen to more episodes and to learn more about Intelligence Bank, visit us at intelligencebank.com.